Welcome back to another episode of Hanna Wonders, the podcast where I, Hanna, wonder about all things theater. And that is especially true this week because for the first time in a long time, I'm actually doing a play. Yes, that's right, folks. I've ventured out of my comfort zone. I've decided I'm going to try something more difficult and more challenging for myself. So this week is all about Song Trilogy, a play by Harvey Fierstein. I want to thank you guys so much for your support of the pod before I jump into everything. This has been such a super fun experience, and even though I know other people record more frequently or on an actual timeline, this is really just a fun project for me and just a way to test my research skills. So I really appreciate that you guys tune in and give me feedback. It's wonderful. Please don't ever stop doing it. I just finished a project working with the amazing Angelica Howland on kind of a co-production deal with the Phoenix Theater Company and a church up north called Shadow Rock Church, where we did a reading of my friend Carolyn Thomas's play called Raft, and it was written by her and a gentleman by the name of Harrison Young, and it was super fun because I actually read this play for a shortened reading that we did, that must have been like 4 or 5 months ago. And what's neat about it is this show is gender blind. So you could play it with 2 men, 2 women, or a man and a woman. And that was done on purpose by Carolyn and Harrison, which is super awesome and not something you see done all the time. So I really enjoyed that process. This reading was the one with 2 men. When I participated, it was the one with 2 women. But I really just dove into it, and it was my first time doing a new work reading as a dramaturg. So what that really means is that I had the opportunity to sit back and look at more of the psychology behind the show. When I do dramaturgy for shows that are well established, you're really doing a production history and the social and historical context of when the show takes place or where it takes place. So normally a dramaturg would work to advise on a show. If it's pre-produced, then it's much more about, hey, this is how other people have done it. This is some options and directions you could take it, and is really there as an advisor to make sure that the choices the director makes are choices made on purpose. That's something I find a lot is, are these choices an actor is making or a director is making on purpose, or is it something that's just kind of come out from the creation process? Is that accent actually a Cockney accent, or is it actually more reminiscent of somebody from Glasgow? Or is it, what kind of Cockney accent is it? Now, of course, my experience is not yet gotten into the more sticky works of it, like accents or what's another good one? Physicality. Say you're working with somebody and the character calls for somebody that has like cerebral palsy. A dramaturg could advise or be a part of that research team to say, hey, I looked into this. Here's some research. Here's how things have been done in the past as to the physicality behind this character. So that's what I have started doing. I haven't gotten to work on a production in that kind of capacity yet. So this is me practicing, right? Looking into the research and the context of it. But when you're working on a new work, it's drastically different because instead of asking questions of the director and the actors and looking at the history of the show, now you're looking at scene breakdowns and beat changes and the timing and pacing of the show. A lot of it is also about the vocabulary used. Does it make sense for this character to use a word like I don't know. Of course, I'm like blanking. But is this a well-educated character, or is this somebody who's undereducated and does this type of dialogue work with that character. And instead of putting your foot down to say, this is how it should be done, in a new work, what you're really saying to, you're working with the playwright, and you're going to say, is this how you want it done? So everything goes to the playwright, and the role of the dramaturg is very different to really just say, is this a choice you've made on purpose? Or is this something in the writing process that kind of came out and now we need to re-examine it? So this is a very new aspect of the work for me, and I am loving it. And I'm very thankful for that opportunity. It was really amazing to do the talk back after that show because the playwrights wanted to know how the audience felt that the characters were affected by gender. So for instance, were there certain jokes that landed or didn't land? Were there some things like references, cultural references that made sense or didn't make sense? So my job doing the talk back is to answer those questions for the playwright by asking the audience and gathering that feedback. And we were in a room full of older white people and it was so fascinating and oddly reassuring because there was a couple times where the discussion of gender comes up. Some of the people in the room were confused about, hey, is this character straight or gay or bisexual? And it was really amazing to hear other older people answer saying, well, I don't think it matters. It's a spectrum, using words and terminology that's very respectful and very forward thinking, which is really reassuring, not only while I'm sitting in a church at a new work reading. So that was amazing to have that turn out anyway, but then to also have them really lean in and be invested in the gender identity politics that can come up in these questions. They didn't shy away from that. And there was a couple times I definitely got goosebumps. So that was a wonderful experience. And watching the playwrights get the feedback that they were looking for to go on to their next set of rewrites was just really special. So I'm excited that I actually have been invited to sit in on another new work process. I won't be acting as dramaturg, but Angelica Howland is directing another piece for Now and Then Theater Company. They perform out of downtown Phoenix, and they are, at the end of this month, doing a piece called Feminist Horror Stories. So super excited. It's absolutely hilarious, but there are 2 readings, and at the end of this episode, I'll give you some more details. I think it's like $15. But again, when you have the opportunity to participate in the creation of a piece of art, there's an ownership, that makes you a true arts advocate because you're saying this is the direction of theater that I want to see. And you're really becoming a part of the process. That's not just blowing smoke up your butt. Like, the participation we get from audience members is invaluable. And I'm going to say that every pod. I know I have in some way or another, but it's very important to me that everyone knows that. So I hope that if you guys are interested, you come check that out. As I said before, though, I was actually kind of challenged by my dad, who is an academic and knows that I'm a sociologist by degree, I should say. And he kind of challenged me to say, you're really diving into this historical context and the production history and all of that's amazing. Why not also talk a little bit about the social criticism and, how the play affected us sociologically. So I'm going to play with that a little bit this pod and see how it feels. My pods are a lot less scripted than you would imagine at this point. So bear with me, and I would love to hear your feedback as I go through these episodes and start to kind of dive more into the depths of it. Why was this piece of art important? How did it affect people? What was it really saying? So I hope that you guys will engage with me online on that. And I'm super excited. In order to understand a show, it's always super important to understand who wrote it. And in this case, it's Harvey Fierstein, or Harvey Fierstein. I can't say it. I tried. Harvey Fierstein. I can't do it. I don't have the voice for it. And I hope I just blew out your speakers, though. Sorry.
Fads keep a-fading, Castro's invading, but will be your timeless to me. hair to the higher, mine feels like barbed wire, but you say I'm chic as can be.
Harvey Fierstein is that guy that you have seen and heard in a million things and on a million soundtracks. You may not know him by name, but you would definitely recognize his voice for sure. That's definitely a trademark. But also, he's just been in everything, even in just lots of bit parts in Hollywood. Harvey was born to Eastern European Jewish immigrants in New York in 1954. And the reason I mention his Jewish heritage is because it's important to recognize that throughout Harvey's career, he was part of not just the gay community, but also the Jewish community. And those two social groups or, identifying factors for him completely changed how he wrote and how he saw the world, and it especially affected his sense of humor. I'm pretty sure that gay Jewish humor is my favorite of all time, and I didn't really know that until I was doing this research. Makes a lot of sense, but that heritage did play into it for him, and it was a strict upbringing. But while we may know him for his voice now, he was actually a soprano before puberty. I'm just going to let that sink in. Harvey Fierstein was a soprano before he hit puberty. Yes. He actually does have a physical abnormality called overdeveloped vestibular folds, and it essentially doubles the amount of folds you have in your throat, which create the sound and create those vibrations. So it almost sounds like he has a double voice, and that's what gives him that really gravelly, raspy sound. It's kind of like two voices laid on top of each other. So if you listen to Hairspray or you watched the Torch Song film, then you'll definitely hear it. And I've always wondered what it was like. Oh, is he just like an aggressive smoker? But no, it's actually a thing. He was consistently enthralled in the arts from a young age, and he did receive his fine arts degree from Pratt Institute in 1973. But as early as 16, he was doing female impersonation, also known as drag. He was even in a play called Pork, which was one of Andy Warhol's few like media things that he did, or like plays that he did. It was staged at the La Mama Playhouse, which I've spoken of before. That's where Godspell was also developed, and it's considered an off Broadway playhouse. But he was always super outrageous. I mean, when I think of Harvey Fierstein, I think of a big personality, a big voice, a big laugh. He just has a lot of light that he brings to the room, and he's very versatile. So this related directly with his personal life. During the time when not many men were out, Harvey never really had to say it. He just lived and does live his life by his own rules. He was never really outed in Hollywood or in New York, as many men were during this time, because we're looking at the early 70s. This was still a time when it was not acceptable to be gay, especially if you wanted to have a career in the public eye. So even though now we think of theater and gay, like that goes together, and queer people have just created the foundation of what we know as theater and Broadway. But at the time, this wasn't something we talked about. And as we go through learning about Torch Song Trilogy, the thing that continuously comes up for me is I forget that we've come so far, but also how much further we have to go. And we'll get into that in a bit. By living his own life authentically, Harvey encountered many ugly sides of New York in the 70s, but this also influenced his work. So the violence, the oppression that was happening, this was just following the Stonewall riot, which was started, as I've spoken about before, by a transsexual Black woman. This was a time of a lot of turmoil, and there was a lot of public dismay with the way that queer people were being treated. So he's seeing all of this violence happening around him. This is prior to the AIDS crisis being kind of noted in history. So we're approaching that, but that doesn't really hit until the early 80s. So just to provide some historical context, that's what's going on. And the Stonewall riot was in New York. So he grew up in Brooklyn, but spent most of his time in Greenwich Village. And so this is all happening around him. He was in the middle of it. And he was somebody that really was one of the first major artists to normalize gay life by presenting gay and lesbian life as contemporary and as simple as hetero life. And what I mean by that is, as we get into his works, while he was seen as a very effeminate gay man, his play, especially Torch Song Trilogy, was about the fact that gay men and women, queer folks, just want to live the same life. And while this seems like such a duh thing to say out loud in 2019, this was a radical concept to be presented to the public in an art form. Of course, people were doing it before, but Harvey, with Torch Song Trilogy, had an opportunity to literally take it to the big stage and put it in front of thousands and thousands of people. And that was so important. One of the quotes that keeps coming up, and I couldn't find if Harvey said it specifically or if it's something that was said about him, but he told stories of queer folks with, quote, no apologies and no climactic suicides. This is such an important note because until a few years ago, I was completely unaware of this like suicide trope that is in queer film and TV. And thanks to a friend, it was actually Carolyn Thomas who wrote Raft. I had no idea that this was a trend in television and film, that if you have a gay couple or a queer couple, that the storyline is going to end with one of them dying either a brutal death or a suicide. And the suicide part was what was really trending at the time in the 70s. If they were telling a queer story, characters never came out and flat out said, I'm a gay character. And if there was reference to a gay character, they always ended up killing themselves. And this is something that still is in media today. And I was so blown away by how ingrained in media it still is. Now it's more, it's a kind of a balance between you're either going to end up with suicide or the violent death. Now, Torch Song Trilogy does have a violent death, but it is spoken about, not seen. And as I said, in this time period, it was much more the suicide stuff that was being shown in film and plays, if at all, if you got anything about queer folks in media or on stage. So Harvey sat down to write Torch Song Trilogy after he had had a really rough breakup after a 2-year-long romance. It's really difficult to actually find a lot of information about his personal life. I tried to do some digging and it wasn't readily available. So I'm not sure if that's a personal choice from him or if he's just kind of kept it out of the limelight over the last 50 years. But Torch Song was just the beginning for him. After that took off, he went on to adopt La Cage aux Folles for the United States stage, and that took off. He's had parts in Mrs. Doubtfire, Bullets Over Broadway, Independence Day, Death to Smoochie, and even Duplex, that really weird, pretty bad Ben Stiller movie with Drew Barrymore. He reprised his role of Edna Turnblad in Hairspray Live, and he was the voice of Yao on Mulan, which I kind of blew my mind because I never noticed that, and it makes total sense. And he also did voiceovers for the newest Dark Crystal TV show. So if you watch that, you'll catch him. He's also plays the mean older gay queen, as they call him, on Big Mouth. So definitely has this type that he gets cast in, which is usually like this very flamboyant, effeminate, crass gay man. And people love him for it. It's just become kind of his trope. And as he's gotten older, he has pulled out of the spotlight quite a bit. I believe that, aside from these television appearances for voiceovers, Hairspray Live was the last big one that he did, to my knowledge. needless to say, the man's had a career. And it's really pretty amazing that this young boy from Brooklyn could create so much. Before we dive into the Torch Song Trilogy plot, which I do want to give you a little bit of the synopsis, considering that it's not as well known. I did find this really amazing thing. I had no idea that a torch song is an actual thing by itself. So a torch song is described as being a sentimental love song, typically one in which the singer laments an unrequited or lost love, either where one party is oblivious to the existence of the other, or one party has moved on, or where one has a romantic affair. So it's these really beautiful, like, sentimental ballads. I had no idea that was a thing. I just thought that it was a creative title. Considering that the plot to this show is interestingly constructed, I definitely want to walk you guys through the synopsis of it and kind of shape the story a bit for you. It's not overly complicated, but where the true power comes in, and I can't give this to you over a podcast, is in Harvey's dialogue that he's written. So while this might seem kind of shallow, I want you to keep in mind that this play is all dialogue, and it actually is 3 parts. So part 1 was written, like I said, before the other 2, when Harvey kind of used this writing experience as a way to have an outlet after he had a really sad breakup. And he was processing a lot of feelings, so he sat down and wrote the first part. So each part has its own name, and I'm going to be referring to it as part 1, part 2, part 3, and give you the titles of each one. Now, each title and each scene within the acts has its own very specific name, and I have left those out a little bit because it was getting really into the weeds. There's they're very specific, but to start us off, part 1 of the 3 acts is called International Stud. And this is named after a famous gay bar in Greenwich Village where gay men would go to this back room to hook up. So obviously that was what was going on in Fierstein's life. So keep in mind as I go through part 1 that this is the piece where he was really exploring this horrible breakup and how he was feeling about it. International Stud opens with a young drag performer named Arnold. He's our protagonist, and he's putting on his makeup and talking with the audience. The opening of this act is a lengthy monologue that really sets up who Arnold is. He talks of his longing to be in a loving relationship and his disappointments with previous lovers, and what he would love to have in a partner. During Stud, Arnold meets a man named Ed. The two talk and develop feelings for each other, and then eventually leave the bar together. Sometime later, Arnold is waiting for Ed to call and finally decides to reach out to him directly. When a woman answers the phone, it's clear to Arnold that there's someone else in Ed's life. Her name is Laurel, and it becomes very clear that Ed hasn't fully invested himself into being gay as an identity, and Arnold ends up incredibly hurt. Back at the bar, Arnold is looking for a one-night stand with someone random. He talks to the audience about how he's not totally comfortable with the idea, but that he really needs that connection. And he's going to give it a try. He's very positive about the experience. So he ends up hooking up with a stranger. 5 months later, we watch as Ed arrives at Arnold's place. Ed tells Arnold that he's happy with the woman he is with, but he hints that he wants Arnold back. Ed confesses his feelings, the feelings that he has for Arnold, but states that he can't have a straight life knowing his feelings for Arnold are so strong. And yet, he's not comfortable with his identity as a gay man. He actually hints to being bisexual, and there is some argument during this first part that some would argue there's some bi erasure, as it's called, and I'll try to come back to that later. International Stud ends with Arnold questioning what he should do. Knowing that Ed is with a woman, but knowing the strong feelings that they have for each other, he has no idea how he's supposed to act or proceed. Then we come to part 2. So yes, it ends like that, where has a monologue at the end of that piece, and he's questioning where he goes from there. So it is a bit of a cliffhanger, but all of these parts were meant to act as separate stories, like as if they could be told without the other ones involved. Part 2 is called Fugue in Nursery. Fugue opens 1 year after Ed and Arnold's initial meeting. Arnold receives a phone call from Ed's lover, Laurel. She calls and invites him to the country, which is odd, for a weekend with her and Ed. Arnold is obviously resistant, but his new young lover, by the name of Alan, would really like to go. It becomes clear that Ed is disappointed that Alan has come with Arnold, and he's jealous of Arnold's new companion. The audience then learns that Alan is very young and has a history of being a hustler or a male prostitute. During this trip to the countryside, Ed and Arnold take off for an afternoon and just spend a few hours chatting and getting together. Both couples want details at the end of the day. And these scenes are really cool in this part because it all takes place in a giant circular bed, and the lights come up on the two people who are having the conversations. So after Arnold and Ed have this afternoon together, they go back to their individual partners, and the partners are having all of these questions and interview them and want to know what happened during the day. As the conversations heat up and becomes more intense, it comes out that Laurel made a pass at Alan while Arnold and Ed were gone. While the couple say they're okay with everything that's happening and that they're all in an open and sexually free relationship, there's continued tension, and it's very obvious that not everyone's on the same page. This tension finally boils over when Alan and Ed go out for a bit. So this is the young boy and Ed. They go out, and Arnold and Laurel are washing dishes together. Laurel accuses Arnold of trying to get Ed back, and Arnold clarifies that it's Ed that's been calling him. So yes, you hear how it's starting to become a oh my God, stay away from my boyfriend situation. And he's like, girl, he's calling me all the time. I'm with someone new. Meanwhile, while all of this is happening, Alan confides in Ed how he and Arnold met, and they're having this great afternoon, and then Ed seduces him. So that's cute. Following the super dramatic weekend away, Laurel comes to the city a few weeks later and tells Arnold that she's left Ed because of how him and Alan hooked up. However, Arnold didn't know that. So this sparks a huge conversation between Alan and Arnold in which they decide to forget their fear and commit to their relationship 100%. Alan and Arnold decide that they're married. They're going to be 100% committed till the end of days. Now, of course, at this point in time, they can't legally be married, but they are committed to each other and have told people that they're together. When Laurel comes by to bring a wedding present, she tells Arnold that her and Ed are getting married as well. So we see back together, break up, get back together, but she begs Arnold not to say anything that could cause Ed to get cold feet. So obviously super secure in that relationship. Then we come to part 3, widows and children first. This part opens 5 years after the previous scene when we find out that Alan and Arnold have decided that they're going to be married. Alan has died. We find out later in this act how, but he was beaten to death with baseball bats by gay-hating thugs in New York. Arnold, at this point, has taken in a 15-year-old boy named David, who he and Alan were going to formally adopt before Alan passed. Ed has left Laurel and, like a douche, is crashing at Arnold's place, which is not immediately obvious why, but the audience learns that a social worker is coming to determine the suitability of Arnold's place for David to live in, and Arnold's mother is coming by for a visit. It's obvious throughout the beginning of this act that Ed wants to get Arnold back like before, but Arnold isn't sold on the idea. When his mother arrives, she thinks that David, the young 15-year-old boy, is a young roommate or sexual partner and attacks Arnold for his choices. Then David reveals that he shares the same last name as Arnold and is actually his son. When Ma discovers that Arnold is caring for him full-time with no intention to pass him to a foster family, she loses it. The audience becomes witness to a horrible fight where she questions the suitability of Arnold's lifestyle when it comes to raising a child. The two of them go at it, diving into all the crap that they'd been keeping to themselves for years. Ed begins really trying to show his love for Arnold after this fight and before the end of the play. He's constantly conveying how he can't live without him and how he'll take care of him, and that it's always been about him since the moment they met. With a little push from David, Arnold decides to accept Ed's offer of love. As Ma is preparing to leave to catch her plane out, they hold a very brief conversation where she expresses her reserved approval or more acceptance of her son's lifestyle. She then confides in Arnold some of the ways that she's learned to grieve Arnold's dad when he passed, hoping that it would help him with the pain of losing Alan. This is a beautiful moment because it's the first one during the play where you see Ma and Arnold connect, and it's over something so sad and so heartbreaking. The play concludes with an olive branch being accepted between Arnold and his mother. So some heavy stuff. There's a lot here to unpack, obviously, but the biggest thing is that this is really about Harvey Fierstein's dialogue. It was masterfully written, and what critics really loved about it is that he was truly authentic to effeminate gay men and their desires to have a normal, loving partnership with somebody that they care about. And so that it was something that was so honest and so real that it just captivated audiences, even if audiences weren't prepared to like it because it centered around homosexuals. Because Arnold is such a relatable character, and he's so funny and quick-witted that you have to end up feeling for Arnold. And if you feel for him, then you have to understand why he's going through the things that he does. So it truly is masterful writing on the part of Harvey Fierstein's to create a character that is so different from so many of his audience members at the time, but ignites compassion in the way the audience experiences this story. The other thing that is super fun about this is the original of the three, so Torch Song Trilogy, so the three pieces put together, was performed in its entirety a lot. And that original piece is 4 hours long. So when I say that that was literally the bare minimum that I could possibly tell you, it was the bare minimum. In no way did that synopsis convey the complexities of the relationships or the emotions behind these characters, but I just really wanted you to get kind of the idea of what's going on and who is involved, so that when we get to talking about casts, you guys will understand what we're talking about. So the first piece of this that was ever shown to the public was just International Stud. And it was performed by itself as a standalone at the La Mama in February of 1978. And that ran for 2 weeks. Then it opened at an off-Broadway theater called the Players Theater in May of 78, so just a few months later, and it ran for 72 performances. Then they tested out Fugue and Nursery, where, again, just did it as a standalone, and that opened on February 1st, 1979. Didn't run very long because that's when Harvey decided it was time to write the third piece and put them all together. He was already working on the third act or the third segment of the trilogy, but that was when he finally decided like these need to just be put together and presented together. So all three parts were presented in 1981, where it played at the Richard Allen Center. It then transferred to the Actors Playhouse in Greenwich Village in January of 82, where it ran for 117 performances. The original cast at the Actors Playhouse included Fierstein playing Arnold, which he did for quite a while, Joel Crothers as Ed, Paul Joint as Alan, and Matthew Broderick as David. Yes, little baby Matthew Broderick. He was so cute. So David is that 15-year-old son character. The Broadway production was directed by Peter Pope and opened on June 10th, 1982 at the Little Theater, where it ran for 1,222 performances and 8 previews. It ended up being one of the longest non-musical shows to run in the 80s. The play won Fierstein 2 Tonys, including Best Play and Best Actor in a Play, and he won 2 Drama Desk Awards for Outstanding New Play and Outstanding Actor in a Play. So, killing it! The film version of Song Trilogy was released in 1988, so just 6 years after its Broadway premiere, and Fierstein was the one who adapted it for the big screen. However, New Line Cinema is who did the project, and the studio had a hard restriction of only 2 hours for the full-length film, so Fierstein had to go through and cut 2 hours out of his original script. I can't even fathom how he did that. I know that he put more emphasis into the third act of the show, or of the film in this case, in order to heighten the drama in that piece. But yeah, they just had to trim so much out of it, so much of the dialogue out of it. Fierstein again starred as Arnold. Anne Bancroft came on as Ma for the project. And then Matthew Broderick came back, but this time he played Alan, so he was the young boyfriend figure. I love this, but originally I guess he had turned down the role for the film because he had a really bad accident in like Ireland or something random. And 2 days into shooting, he called Fierstein and changed his mind and wanted the role really bad. So Harvey fired the guy that they had hired to play Alan. And just was like, all right, peace out. That's some true friendship. That's how true friends operate. One of my favorite bits of research when looking through this, like the history of the production, was one of the scenes they were filming at the very end of the film was in this neighborhood, and the person living next door to the doorway they were using for the final sequence didn't give permission to film outside his home. So when the director would shout action, the resident would either put on his radio or television super loud or open his door and ruin the shot. So I guess the crew became like super fed up and nailed his door shut to like get the shot they needed. And obviously the neighbor ended up suing and filed a lawsuit against New Line. The film is still well loved. It's kind of a cult classic. It has a 71% on Rotten Tomatoes for people who care about that kind of thing. But the big difference between the play and the film is it's chronological in nature. The play relies heavily on flashbacks or and things like that. And with using film as its medium, it was easier to do it chronologically. So that's the biggest difference. And the shortening of it. So just really trimming down all of that time. And it's really hard to explain what they trimmed unless you've read or seen the play and the film. So if you're a super nerd, go for it. It's fascinating to see what Fierstein felt was crucial to the show. And what he felt, was stuff that the audience didn't need. So I always find that kind of thing kind of interesting. I don't know how I would ever go about cutting half of a project like that, but that's just me. In the fall of 2017, a revised and cut down version of Song Trilogy was produced off-Broadway by Second Stage Theater. It starred Michael Urie as Arnold, and these rewrites again were done by Fierstein, and he decided to put the heft of the show in that third act, widows and children first. So all of that drama with Ma became this kind of that focal point, because Fierstein felt that is the piece that really shows this passive acceptance of gay people and how, in relationships, with your parents as a queer person, you can run into, I accept who you are, but that doesn't mean I like it. And so Fierstein really wanted to dive into that piece and wanted to make sure that the drama of that interaction with Arnold and his mom was what got the most attention. And then, of course, he was also addressing issues like gay adoption and queer relationships, and it just that third segment was really what set the show apart, and really added the bulk of the drama. So that's what he decided to really focus on. But people asked him, what are you going to change? What are you rewriting things? And Harvey said, I wish I could say this line like him in his voice, but I can't. But he said, I haven't changed it as much as I've edited it, because I'm not the person I was 40 years ago when I wrote it. I wouldn't dare rewrite my younger self, but I can, through editing, shape it the way one shapes a performance or anything else. And I can make it relevant to the audience that's seeing it now. And I really admire that. I mean, I love that he's like, I'm not gonna rag on the stuff that I created before because it got him where he is. But you can still manipulate the performance, and he's obviously a different person than he was at such a young age. So that's super cool. The revival of this show did have a really short run. It was coined just Torch Song. They took out the trilogy part, and has a much lower running time. It's closer to 2 hours, so a little bit closer to the film. And it had a shorter run. It started October of 2018 and closed in January of this past year. But it was well received. People liked it. I thought it was interesting that a critic had said it's far less avant-garde than the original, and I think that's what you lose when you take someone like Fierstein out of that role. He definitely had such a unique way of acting and such a unique perspective on the show, so that was very different with Michael Urie in the role. The show itself still had incredible impact. He had an insane influence on pop culture. Some critics have even said that the popularity of Torch Song Trilogy is the reason that we had the foundation for works like Queer as Folk and Will and Grace and Modern Family and RuPaul's Drag Race even. He, as I said, I keep using this word normalized, but he really brought to the forefront what it could look like to see a queer relationship and a queer person as normal, as just someone existing and going through life as anyone else. And it seems like such a silly thought. It feels weird even saying that, but the truth is that we're looking at, when this was created in the 70s, at a time when that was absolutely not the case. And so it's important to remember the context that this show was written in and what it has done since then. I really loved that his entire career has been about dispelling stereotypes of gay promiscuity, and that was something I saw a lot in reading the play. I unfortunately haven't been able to see this play live, but I did read it, and it's really amazing how delicately he talks about the stereotype of gay promiscuity. And this was really embodied in the character of Ma, because when she comes in with this tolerance of her son, it's not love, it's she tolerates his queerness, he tolerates his, as she calls it, his lifestyle, but it makes the audience question, well, how do you tolerating him isn't loving him. How can you say that you love him? She questions his ability to raise a child because of his, quote, lifestyle. And this is really important because this was, of course, already in the midst of the gay equality movement, the queer equality movement, but also it was right before the AIDS crisis. And once the AIDS crisis hit, which was after Torch Song was written, and that's very important, but the spike in violence against queer people was so drastic and so aggressive and startling that that it really became this separation in our history. And for those of us that are allies of queer rights and queer visibility, this is a very important note that there's before the AIDS crisis and then there's after. And the reason queer people were already suffering, gay men were already suffering in New York City with AIDS, but the government didn't really acknowledge it until it began affecting straight people. This included children, but there were kids who were being kicked out of school because of HIV. There was so little that people knew at the time about the disease, and so having this as kind of a glimpse into the life of gay men at this point prior to the AIDS crisis is a really interesting snapshot. And it just fascinates me that we have the opportunity to look at life through theater in snapshots based on when the plays were created. I think that it's such a unique thing that theater can bring us. Film does it as well. But it's really fascinating to me. And I felt so much more educated after researching this pod. But I do want to say that the best line that Fierstein's ever said that had to do with how and why he wrote Torch Song Trilogy was this thing he said: "It's heinous to suggest that gay people have no issue other than AIDS." And this was a continuing thing through the next couple of decades where every story was about the AIDS crisis. And it focused on the violence, of course, which is important, that gay men and women and trans men and women were facing at the time, but also it downplays the relationships. It takes away the humanity. And it's just like how I believe I've talked about before, when you throw a diagnosis on someone, say for mental health, you take away the identity of the person and you put them in a category. That's what all stereotypes do. And what Fierstein was so good at was saying, we have lives, we have full, rich, real lives that matter, and we want to be loved, and we want to be in partnerships, and we want all of the same things that your heteronormative world is used to. Simply because a man is effeminate doesn't mean he doesn't want those same things that a straight couple would want. And that was such an important thing to be said at the time. It was something so unique to be said at the time, because instead of just celebrating queerness, it wasn't about that. It was actually about normalizing it. And that is so important to this time period. And there's a good reason why it launched the career that Fierstein had. So I just really appreciate that about him. So that about does it for me today. I hope that you enjoyed this ride through kind of queer history and Fierstein's first play. It definitely made me appreciate him more, especially how has implemented drag into almost his entire career. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed that. My next pod, I'm still toying with a couple ideas, but my sister has asked, and I've had another person ask to do Moulin Rouge, which would definitely start with the film, kind of in reverse of what we did today, to talk about the creation of the film itself and then how it went to Broadway and how it's doing there now. So I think that's the direction that I'm going to be headed in the next few weeks. So join me if you're interested in that. But while I have a ton of things I know I want to hear about or learn about, I would love feedback from you. So please go ahead and comment on whatever platform you're listening to and let me know what you are craving. What are you interested in? More plays? Should I stick to musicals because this was just ridiculous? Or let me know if you have any comments about some of the social stuff that Fierstein did in the 70s and 80s. I'd love to hear all about that as well. Feminist Horror Stories, that project that I'm working on at the end of the month, will be read, like I said, at Now and Then Theater, and that is on the 25th and 26th of October. Tickets are available online. We're coming into the closing of Kinky Boots at the Phoenix Theater Company, which is absolutely fantastic if you have the opportunity to see it. And we are about to open Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. That is opening this upcoming Friday, so I'm super excited about that one as well. Definitely a tech-heavy show. Lots of amazing actors and actresses in this one. You won't want to miss it. Again, that is at the Phoenix Theater Company. I want to make sure that everyone knows that there are affordable options if you want to join in on these theatrical experiences. Most organizations in the Valley have some sort of program like this. We have a couple. If you're a local artist, bring a program to the Phoenix Theater Company box office. And if you've been on stage within the last year, then you can get what's called an art card. And that gives you 2 tickets for $15 a piece, 1 hour prior to showtime. And that's good for any Phoenix Theater shows. And then we also have our student rush, which is with any valid student ID, you can get a $15 ticket before showtime, the evening of the show. And what's great about these opportunities is we front fill the theater. So you might show up, 20 minutes before showtime and get a front row seat. You never know. We are also on Gold Star. But I'm really excited about some of the things Phoenix Theater is doing this year. Of course, I'm biased because that's where I work and live and enjoy seeing shows. But I hope that you guys get an opportunity to at least see these couple. Kinky Boots is really fantastic, and yeah, just a celebration of musical theater, the spectacle. I mean, it's Cyndi Lauper and Harvey Fierstein. So it's fun. It's a great night at the theater with some really beautiful, honest moments. So I hope that you guys will check those out. But until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful couple of weeks. Hopefully it won't be so long between pods these days now that I've got my life back together a little bit. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm just having an absolute blast doing this with you, and I look forward to hearing from you guys. If you are so inclined, please feel free to share the link for the pod with your friends and family. Hit subscribe if you are so inclined, or go ahead and let people know that I'm on Spotify, I'm on YouTube, I'm on iTunes, we have our own website, all of that good stuff. So I hope you guys check in and let your friends and family know all about Hanna Wonders Pod, and I will see you next time.